fancy way of saying the scores look different, and a lot of times they're setting up a situation for the performers to act in. So everything's gonna sound different. He breaks it down into 5 different types of process, chance determination processes. That's like the I Ching, I don't know if any of you remember that, where Cage, there's like these die that you can throw, and then he would pick the musical material based on what answer was in the die. So that's just completely chance-oriented. People process, performers move through the material at their own speed. Contextual, so dependent on variables that come up in the music. And repetition processes, which is much of minimalism, and then electronic processes. Oliveros did a lot of electronic processes, but the people process music pieces are really interesting, and I think they have a lot of pedagogical possibilities that are overlooked. So, moving on. The experience is radically different when you do this kind of music. There's little or no dependence on the score. The musical model values and integrates input from the performer on unprecedented levels. So some of these pieces are completely open. And the music's value is not based on static material, but on unique human action. From a pedagogical standpoint, I think that it's better not to start with like the completely open form. It's going to freak out your students, and they probably would be like, why are you having me do this? But some of the group pieces are really interesting. I thought that we could just do one, because talking about this in the abstract it has its limitations. So I'm hoping that you all are game for an activity this early in the morning. So it would be best if we were all oriented so that we could see each other. I don't know if you're comfortable just coming to the front and stand in a circle. So Oliveros wrote a set of pieces over a period of 20 years called Deep Listening Pieces, and they were, she developed them with a group of people. So it was like a group that met weekly, and they were trying to work on like nonverbal communication, like their interaction with like the environment. She was doing a lot of different things, and this particular piece is called Tuning Meditations. And the score is just the short like text saying, using any vowel sound, sing a tone that you hear in your imagination. After contributing your tone, listen for someone else's tone, and tune to this pitch as exactly as possible. Continue by alternating between singing a tone of your own and tuning to the tone of another voice. Introduce new tones at will and tune to as many different voices as are present. Sing or. So basically, there's no other parameters in that. She doesn't say like who starts, who ends, but just within the group, you never know what's going to happen. So is that clear to everyone that you're basically just alternating? So you sing pitch, whichever one you want to, and listen for something else in the texture.
We're doing all this in here.
Mm-hmm. hard, like not So yeah, if you want to go back to your seats. Thank you. So what do you guys think? Any thoughts? No thoughts? Well, I could say what the desired outcomes would be. What I came up with for a group of people. It levels the playing field for mixed level groups. So this was a group of trained musicians, so maybe ours would sound different than other groups, but I've done this with many different groups of people, and anyone can do it, even non-musicians, which makes it really unique and interesting if you've ever wanted to give a group of people an experience of what performance could be like, or what music making is like when they don't feel like they have the skill for it, or they don't have any musical background. It's really not hard to match a pitch, and even if they don't match it right, it doesn't really matter. Like, they're still involved in a texture, they're still involved in like making decisions, creative decisions in the moment, adding their voice to the texture. It also is, this is kind of a side note, but one of the most interesting things I think about a lot of the pieces in this period is they a lot of times were political models, like they were making political statements, and a lot of them are associated with certain resistance movements. So Oliveros was really associated with the feminist movement in that time. She later came to say that like she didn't think that this should be associated with one gender or another, but at the time it was very like, radically equal. That like everybody is in a group and everybody is equal and there's no score. And yes, a lot of other people were doing this, but in the rest of her deep listening pieces, there's a focus on the body that's very unique, and that's something that her male contemporaries weren't doing. So another thing, I thought it does like simulate a mental performance space relatively quickly. I don't know if that was your experience in that short time. Does anyone have a comment about that? Or like how it might simulate performance?
Can you repeat that question?
What about what we just did simulated in some ways a musical performance? Or the experience of it? Yes.
Listening to others across the group to make sure that you are cohesive as a unit.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Just like the participatory aspect, I just like what you said about like even if you had someone who it was a challenging task for, they're still going to participate. If I make a tone, someone else who is able to do it can match me, and so I'm just actively participating.
Do you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say just the simple act of phoning in front of other people for, you know, like you're saying, if you want to do this with people who've never done it before, you know, just singing in front of somebody can be really hard, so it's a good way to kind of push them out the door.
Yes.
I'm not coming up with quite the right word for it. The word I have in my head is excitement, and that's a little too strong. You have like excitement light. But the part of live performance that's kind of indeterminate, that you know the tempos can change a little bit or whatever. It's just a little. It's supposed to just you have a piece. It's 3 pages long. You know exactly how long it's going to be. You've heard it before. It's indeterminate, and it'll be different every time. And there's kind of a little bit of excitement, a little bit of thrill.
That's actually a really good point, and one of the reasons why I think this is so valuable is because a lot of young performers and seasoned performers, like that aspect of we can't control everything can add a lot of stress, and it can be a barrier between really like authentic performances or performances that allow for intuitive expressivity, which as a concept I'll get to a little bit later, but it's basically just if you're able to express with non-intellectual processes, which is something Csikszentmihalyi, I'll talk about him later too, talks about flow. Like when you're in that state where like everything's really, like what you're doing, your awareness, like everything kind of just like comes together in this zone. To help facilitate that for students, I think it's hard because a lot of younger students aren't going to have the opportunity to perform often. If they do, it's high stress situations. They might not have the facility to learn pieces that quickly to facilitate a lot of performance, like to get used to what that feels like. So if you have just this 5 minutes, you have a bunch of different people who don't have to look at a score, they don't even have to read the score, and they might just start to get a taste for what does it feel like to concentrate and listen and make a decision. And to add your voice to a group of people. And yes, all of this happens through like choruses and your like conventional means of performing, but I think that especially if you had a workshop situation with a lot of different people, this would be a good way to kind of start getting into that mentality if they're not able to, or also not able to have a continuous concentration. Because that's another thing, like this was a shorter piece, but some of these other pieces get long, and you're having to concentrate for like 6 or 7 minutes. And that might not even happen for a singer unless they're 25 and singing an opera, because when do we sing pieces that are longer than 5 minutes? And I think we thought through all of these. Also, like introducing the new criteria for judging a performance, that's a good one too. Because you can't compare what you've done to recordings. Like it doesn't make any sense with this kind of music. It's like listening to a performance of 433 and being like, well, which one was better? You know, so how does that relate to expressivity? This is really going through Csikszentmihalyi's ideas. He was a psychologist, probably a name you've heard of in relation to flow, which he describes as actions follow upon action according to an internal logic that seems to need no conscious intervention by the actor. He experiences it as unified flowing from one moment to the next, in which he is in control of this action. Sorry, this is a typo. In which there is little distinction between self and environment, between stimulus and response, or between past, present, and future. And he talks about like how what you need for flow. Says in merging of actions and awareness, the activity must be feasible with clearly established rules for action, but at the same time must give participants a sense of discovery, novelty, and challenge. And that's difficult, like to challenge them, but still make the activity feasible. So in his book, I think it's called Beyond Boredom and Anxiety, he talks about how a lot of times you can get into flow like playing a game, like something like with repetition. Or if you're like listening to minimalist music and like running, maybe you like get into flow. I don't know. What are your experiences with? Did you know what he's talking about here?
I feel like for me, doing that exercise, like he mentioned that it was without conscious thought. So I clearly wasn't flowing because I was thinking very much about what I was going to do. And how interesting it was that each of us could change the complete texture of the piece. We could try to make it more tonal by like creating triads, or we could try to throw each other off by singing the weirdest note we could think of, you know. But there was definitely conscious thought, so I was not.
Yeah, I mean, not that everyone's gonna get into flow like at every, like, that would be like magic. Then I would like win some award for being like the best teacher ever. No, I just think that it gives more opportunities for maybe experiencing this, and some students that sometimes. Maybe not the first time you do it. I mean, because this was an activity that we just did, but if we started every class period with it, you know, things might be different. And also, the deep listening pieces, tuning in meditations was the only one that I thought we would talk about today, but things are going kind of quick, so maybe I can talk about some of the other pieces. Oliveros has some pieces that I think are a little more advanced, where she specifies that you need to make the sound in accordance to like physical sensations you have on your body. And then it starts to be like, okay, like how am I gonna make a sound based on that? But if you go through her pieces, like easier to harder, like in my document, my doctoral document, I developed a class that like goes from easy to hard, kind of like putting these things together, because I don't think that you can just start with some of those pieces, but if you can get there, that's really valuable, because then the student's having to use some sort of process that's not intellectual. Like, I don't know what that would be for everyone. It might be different for different people in different situations, but something else has to spur the creative material. And it's difficult because when you do that, like a lot of like mental things are like, what am I doing? This is weird. I mean, there's a lot of like barriers to it, but I think that if you can ease into it in the right way, and I think it's easier to get into a flow with this sort of thing than singing my first Mozart aria in front of my master class. You know, like maybe for some people, like that would work. For me, I was always way too stressed out. So with non-intellectual processes, yes, like her connection to the body and the sonic her idea of sonic awareness. She like wrote a book about that. I don't really want to get into that today, but it's about different ways of listening to the environment. So she has exercises where you like have focal attention versus like a different kind of listening attention, and she like wants you to separate it in like these cool ways. But with an non-intellectual processes, that's also something that his name was Thomas Galloway. Do you guys know? Timothy Galloway, thank you. He wrote the book, The Interview of Tennis. Do you know this book? Okay. He talks about like self one and self two, and I think it's kind of the same thing, where the self two is like subconscious one, where if you're just like pretending like you're warming up in tennis and you're like everything's fine, like you play amazing, then all of a sudden like the game starts and like something interferes, and he calls that self one. So his whole idea is like, how do you get self two to come out? So it's like connected to the body somewhat, connected to the subconscious somewhat, but like it's still under an intellectual control. Like it's kind of weird. Like everybody has these ideas like something else is taking over. I call that like just intuition. It has an element in everything, but obviously like, you can't turn off self one when you're performing kind of ever. But to sort of integrate the two of them in different ways. MC Richards wrote a book called Centering in 1964, which is a really interesting book. She's a potter, but her book about like centering is really wonderful for musicians. I would recommend buying it, where she talks about this kind of like holistic, bringing in your attention on your body, like in your mind, like everything coming together in a very like 60s way. So we have like 5 minutes left. I don't know, does anyone have questions? I could talk a little bit about my course. Yes?
So I do some of this work with my students in my studio as well,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's really wonderful to see this in presentation. It was awesome. What are some suggestions with texts that you use for students that maybe have general anxiety and finding ways to go, like you said, into full performance of standard operatic literature or recitals, using some of these techniques or some of these pieces, maybe in the studio or as warm-ups?
Well, I think one is just adding positive performance experiences to their memory. So that in itself can help. And if you can get them to see that this is a legitimate performance, like if the teacher takes it seriously, I think the students will take it seriously. And you take it seriously, like this is in a canon of literature from the 60s, and we might think it's kind of crazy, but it's legit. And if you say, well, what criteria? We have to use different criteria now. Like there's no reason to compare yourself to other people because the criteria for this is that you're in the moment. That's what authentic performance is, like to keep pushing on, like to focus on what the purpose of the music is, and then it can kind of help take the focus off of yourself. And I know that performance anxiety is complex. It's not like, it's not going to be the same for everyone, but I think that this perfectionism plays a big part into it. And it's really hard to be a perfectionist in this kind of music. It really challenges your ego because like you don't really have time to think about if it sounds pretty, maybe not too many meditations, but in like other pieces, you're so concentrated on trying to respond in the way that you're supposed to respond. I don't know if there's any like clean way just to like switch and talk over at that point, but if they can start using that criteria in their conventional repertoire as well, which I think would be helpful. I mean, it's not helpless to compare ourselves to Maria Callas. So if using some of the criteria also in the conventional repertoire. Yes?
And then the other thing is aspect of like voice building. So you're doing all this voice building work with your students as you're building their instrument. How do you incorporate the stuff you're working on with voice building into this sort of rep?
I don't know about that. I was imagining that this would be like part of an opera workshop or part of your studio, but not necessarily something that linear of a connection.
Yeah.
It's kind of like going around, because if you focus too much on that voice building in this context, it's going to take away from like the intuitive element that is what we're trying to develop. Because there's lots of other places to work on technique. Anything else? Yes.
I really like the idea of like starting out a studio master class with something like this, because you know there's sometimes a little bit of tension in the room over I don't really want to sing, I haven't memorized my piece, or this or that, the other. This gets everyone up there, it gets everyone singing. And I think it's also very important to start working with students about finding freedom in the music, because we spend so much time, I have to sing this pitch exactly right, I have to sing this rhythm exactly right, I have to do this dynamic exactly right, and I want it to sound like Renee Fleming, and then this, you have to be creative with this, and you get to make the decisions, and I think that that's something that's really neglected in a lot of music training situations. Like we concentrate so much on creating this ideal that there's very little freedom. So I think it's a great idea to sort of incorporate that into the student.
Would it help people deal with that comfort of like what's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen. That's like a special, scary, fun place that if you can enjoy, that's where like the great performances come from. But it took me a long time, I don't know about you guys, to get comfortable in that space. And doing this kind of music really, like, I liked it. I started to enjoy that, like to enjoy that space of like what's going to happen in a new way. So for me, it made a big impact. So
Any last question?
Yes.
Because this is such an ensemble-driven type of musical creation, how do you envision like harnessing that into soloistic performance?
Well, some of them aren't so like group oriented. The Oliveros, yes, like her deep listening pieces most of the time are for groups, but then she breaks it down and then to groups of two. So a lot of them are pair pieces. Also, I can talk to you after. I can give you a list of like the pieces I picked in my class, where you'll just have the interaction between two people, and you can even then start having people watch those performers, which was something I thought could add. Like start a class with all the group activities, and maybe like halfway through, when you start going down to two people, then start experimenting with what it feels like to have someone watch you, because you want to create this safe space, and most of the time in something like training meditations, you don't have an audience. Like she's just against having an audience. But for the purposes of getting people used to being watched, yeah. I think in pairs, that's enough. And then you can start doing extended vocal technique stuff like George Crumb. We can look at other things as a way to get back into solo stuff. All right.
Thanks, Krista.
Thank you. Should I just close it?
Yeah.
So David Gordon-Johnson is our next presenter. He'll be presenting on transitioning a classical singer into a career in music theater.
Thank you.